I'm all lit up. I'm all lit up. All those years ago. Now, listen, I was talking to somebody yesterday. He was complaining because he says that I sold out. That yeah. No, it wasn't. What happened was I was going through a lot of personal angst and problems. My wife's been stuck at home, and I had to worry about her whether she'd deal with this coronavirus shit and be able to not see her family and stuff. And I mean, as for me, I get cabin fever. Luckily, I've been at work. I haven't had to really suffer too much about it. But you know, after all these problems and everything, and my abuse and my drunkenness that's caused loads of trouble. I thought to myself, all right, maybe I better just put myself back in the tin a little bit, close the can, but and that was just for my own mental agility. Really, I couldn't sort of carry on doing this because I'd lost the heart to it. And I was sick of the Beatles and sick of McCartney. Now I've sort of had time to you know mentally reflect on all that, and it's who cares. But there are some things that still need to be said. There's still a Hard Day's Night album needs to be done. That will be done. I'm not that excited about it, but it will be done. I've gone out. I've gone out. Gotcha. Mm, mm. So anyway, I've been accused of being beaten down by the bad guys, and I said, no, no, it's not at all like that. It's just, you know, the vinyl community is not for me, really. Like I said, I haven't got vinyl for a long time. I don't see a point in getting vinyl or collecting it. I think it's a lot of a waste of money when you could be out there trying to save the fucking rhinoceros, and there's about 200 left of them in the world. Do you know what I mean? Your money could go to something good like that. And I'm not like Paul McCartney and say, oh, don't eat lambs, look after the animals. Because, you know what I mean? I like eating meat. I'm sorry. But let the butchers do the butchery. All right? I'm not thinking about it. I just feel sad when I see cows and I see lambs and I see animals dying for us to eat. Yeah, I know. It's bad. But you've got to be realistic as well. Do you want to give up eating meat? If you don't want to give up eating meat, you've got to accept the fact that chickens are going to get their necks wrung, sheep are going to get slaughtered, cows are going to get slaughtered. It's the way it is. We want meat, we've got to fucking go through that. Now, in that way, I'm a hypocrite, but I'm not a fucking hypocrite like Paul McCartney. I don't force people to do this. I don't say save the slug, save the ant. Do you know what I mean? The other day, my wife's eating a watermelon. She didn't eat it all up, so she left it on the side. And within about an hour, there was an army of ants that all started munching away at it. So I got the fly spray out, and I committed genocide on those ants that had decided to eat the watermelon. And I didn't like doing it, but I said to them before I did it, I said, listen, you lot, you're dead. I said, there's nothing I can do about this. There's too many of you on the watermelon. I'm going to have to get Adolf Hitler on you. And that was the way it was. Anyway, listen, what we're really going to talk about today is not so much the Albert Goldman book, The Lives of John Lennon, but um, there's been a few books written and they've been shot down in flames. People who love John Lennon, and I'm one of them, and they will not accept the truth of the matter. Now, I think Goldman really uh, did a brilliant job of research on not only the John Lennon book, but also the Elvis Presley one. And now thanks to his research, we now know how Elvis lived in the last few years of his life. We also now know how John lived in his last 5 years. Now, this is one of the biggest myths out there. Those 5 years, I'm a house husband. I cook meals. I look after Sean. I change his nappies. There wasn't any of that shit going on. He basically realised that he'd burnt out. He'd totally burnt out by 1974. People weren't interested in John Lennon anymore. All right, he did the Walls and Bridges album, but he was about finished. Musically, he was about finished then. And we'll get on to Double Fantasy in a minute because um, that in itself is a joke. I mean, it's a difficult album to review, and I haven't reviewed it. I'd like a lot of the John Stonk songs on there, but the concept of the album about a sort of this sort of love, middle-aged love, it is total bullshit. And the only reason that it ever happened was because Yoko knew that her bullshit wasn't going to cut no ice unless she had John to fucking hang on to the coattails of. So that's why Double Fantasy come along, and she made sure that she was in charge of that project. And this is where John became a pathetic creature that had just been hiding and living somewhere, basically watching TV all day, smoking dope, snorting coke, not really looking after his son, like which was said. I don't think his son really even knew who he was, to be honest with you. I mean, from the Goldman book, and we get a very, very good um, insight into what the Dakota building was like and who was coming in to play with the boy, the visitors John was having. And John was kind of isolated. It was Yoko that was running the Dakota. It was Yoko that was getting in touch with all the people. Oh, we're doing this, we're doing that. She set the timeline for this whole business. It was total bullshit, though. The love of those two was the biggest lie of all. It didn't happen. Andy Peebles said, and you can look this up, how Andy Peebles, who did the last interviews with John Lennon, said that the whole situation was fake, and everything that John said, he had to say in front of Yoko. And it was all this kind of, oh, give me a little pet pill. And Yoko was giving him a pet pill. Yoko had totally dominated him by this point, and it was a sad end for somebody who could have been a great person. And I'll tell you something else about John Lennon. There was that dreadful film yesterday, which is total shit, and it it ended with John Lennon sort of living, sort of, as a sort of a painter come drifter on the seashore, but living in a nice enough place. Now that wouldn't have happened. John Lennon would have been nothing if it hadn't have been for what had happened with the Beatles. He would have just stayed in Liverpool, become a pain in the arse, possibly gone to prison 2 or 3 times, and that's what it was. He was lucky he met Paul McCartney. I think Paul was a kindred spirit to him, although they're very different people, and that did become a problem at the end. But Yoko was the biggest problem of all, and let's discuss Yoko. I mean, the Goldman book basically says she was insane. She had been committed to a mental institution in Japan. She had also been guilty of prostitution, in fact, right up to the point where she met John Lennon. And what would you do if all of a sudden John Lennon had come into your gallery and started taking a sort of drug addled interest in the bullshit you had up there? All you needed was somebody a bit weird, a bit different to say, come on, I'm your new person in your life. All right, Cynthia was totally wrong for John. She's boring. She weren't the middle class, fucking goody two shoes girl that she makes out to be. It's just another myth. She was just some bird who lived in with her parents in rented accommodation, which wasn't too fancy, just like semi-detached shit that they built in the 30s. And a lot of these places were rented anyway. And I think her parents were renting a place, so it didn't make them any more middle class than what John Lennon was. And John Lennon was working class scumbag. His two parents were a joke. I mean, he had a dad who was no better than a dishwasher, and his mum seemed to open her vagina for just about anybody that come along. And I can understand how he was troubled by that. But meeting Yoko didn't help him. It made things 50 billion times worse. It wasn't John's agenda from 1968, it was Yoko's agenda. And when in about 1973, the whole thing fell apart, the whole John and Yoko joke fell apart. And people tend to not look at this period. Then he went through this so-called lost weekend. And then I think he realized by the end of this lost weekend that he couldn't command the respect and love of women like he used to. I mean, I think he got slapped by one of the waitresses he tried to grope. He was acting like an animal during this time, and he must have felt so embarrassed. And yeah, we do tend to try and go back to someone we've just split up with if we haven't got a partner to go with. We do. We tend to go back. And this is what John did when she turned up on the night of the Madison Square with Elton John. He was probably just feeling, what am I now? I'm a pathetic wanker, and hid for 5 years. That's what he did. He hid. And then when Yoko decided it was time for them to come out, we're running out of money. Oh, but Yoko can't get the money to come into this block. It'll have to be John Lennon, so I'm going to have to let John out of the box. Write some songs, John. Write some love songs about me. So it's all a farce. And like I said, Peebles said it was a joke. Read about that, and then you'll understand. Oh, Mayo's movies, what are we doing? Oh, I didn't know you would be awake. I thought you'd be well asleep. Anyway, listen, this is directed at you because you're a Yoko lover. All right. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Well, anyway, as soon as we just got to that bitchy level, let me say my piece. Let me say my piece, because I know what I'm talking about. Even John Heaton has said that some books are unpopular, and he's gonna take what he thinks is real or honest. And I think Fred Seaman's book is totally honest, totally honest. And I also think Goldman's book is about 95% honest. And if you're a Beatle fan, you should read this book because it's one of the most important. After The Love You Make and Shout, I think The Lives of John Lennon is probably the most important book to read. And I would also like to see a kind of Goldman book about McCartney afterwards, because nobody's, obviously they're going to get their arse sued off if they do anything about Paul McCartney. But we know about Paul. In England, we definitely know about Paul. We know he's a joke. He's a cheap bastard. He sings really shit songs now. And that's the way we look at him. But there's people out there, they still love him. Yeah, me too. Me too. I am a John fan, but I'm not going to say, oh, because John supposedly loved Yoko. No, John was a slave to Yoko. He was a slave. He'd put himself in that position because he'd gone and bigged up John and Yoko, the brand, so big. When he did go through his lost weekend, he didn't know who he was anymore. He didn't give a fuck. And as a drunk man like myself, I've been in this position. I've split up with women. I've gone out. I've caused mayhem, and then I've just scuttled back into my little box. And I thought, oh, I don't want to come out. I don't want to come out anymore because the world's gonna hate me because of what I did in the last 48 hours. And you have to wait for the response. And he wasn't getting a response. He was becoming less and less relevant. And I'm sorry to say that about John Lennon, but he was becoming less and less relevant. He was doing what Paul later did, hanging around with relevant people, like hanging around with Bowie, hanging around with Elton John. But there wasn't any collaboration between these people. It was just, oh, I'll turn up at the studio, now we'll do this and we'll do that. There was nothing big between these people, but it was more a case of John using them and not just them, but other people as well. And I think he just disappeared because he just thought, I'm washed out, and he was washed out at that point. And like I said, Double Fantasy did give us a little insight into how good John could be, how many songs he could write if he's in the right state of mind. But I just think that the John and Yoko thing is totally, by 1970, I think the John and Yoko thing had worn off. It was just but by the time he did New York City, this was obviously totally a project of Yoko's, and it was the most horrible album. John's totally let off for it. I don't think that John gets trouble for this because people whitewash this part of the history. I mean, it was like they were taking on causes which weren't just causes, they were causes that were out to shock Black Power, the IRA, um, the murderer, what was his name? The black guy who killed um, the Black Panther fella in Jamaica who got executed. They would take and Han Ratty. All of these causes were a fucking joke. You know what I mean? These people had been proved as guilty, bad, sad, or mad, and yet John and Yoko, just to get attention, just to get press publicity, and all that baggies and raggies and taggers. I know it looks a bit cute nowadays, but it didn't amount to nothing. It amounted to stupidity. And like I said, I hate to say this about John, but and I'd like to think if he hadn't have been shot, he could have done some better stuff. I definitely think the Beatles would have reformed by 1982. I think definitely for the just out of money, for financial. Yoko would have agreed to that. John would have agreed to that. Paul would have agreed to it. George and Ringo definitely would have. I mean, it's finances, isn't it? They would have done something. I don't think they would have done a new album, or if it had have been a new album, it wouldn't have been very good. So thank God. But let's not be fooled by the myth of John and Yoko because it was bullshit. It was bullshit from start to finish. And she's still making loads of money out of this. Oh, Penny, what do you think of Yoko? She's a cunt, isn't she? We hate Yoko. We really hate Yoko. Now, if you agree, say yeah. Oh, and by the way, I've just got some more notes that I wanted to debunk. So I'm going to have to quick look at them. All right. So, myth number one, the 5 years in the household as a stay at home dad is crap. Bullshit. They had other people to do all the fetching, carrying, and changing nappies. Don't think it was just mum and dad living at home. They got slaves as well. All right. John was due for surgery on his nostril due to cocaine abuse just before he got shot. So there you go. He was on drugs. All right. And it's well documented he was smoking dope, which I got no problem with because dope just, you know, keeps you out of trouble all day, really. All right. Yoko was sectioned in Japan as a lunatic by her own parents. She was living as a beggar when she met John, and when he showed up, she knew she could control him at once. It takes a nutter to know a nutter. Yoko was a prostitute. Yeah, when she went to America, she lived off the earnings of prostitution because she couldn't make money out of art because it's not art what she was doing. It's bullshit. Avant-garde is just another word for person with a little bit of money in their pocket, out of control. Um, Yoko needed to control John and was responsible for the worst traits of his career. The hopeless causes, but the shock value got boring. It really did. By the time of the Lost Weekend, the shock value was gone. People would just say, "Oh, John and Yoko being pricks again." That was it. That was it. Double Fantasy was a Yoko-inspired piece of crap that was only released because Yoko was irrelevant without John's input. And finally, Andy Peebles said the whole 1980s interviews were a smokescreen by Yoko, and it was as fake an album as you could imagine. Imagine all the people. So it is a very sad thing that he got shot when he did. But also, I don't think he could have got back onto, say, when he released Imagine, he could, with Double Fantasy or what had come after Double Fantasy, he couldn't have done it. I don't think. If he'd hung around with Yoko, it just wouldn't have. It wouldn't have worked out. We love Double Fantasy now because it was a swan song for John. Uh, but I'm just trying to catch my thoughts here. Yes, we love Double Fantasy because it was a swan song for John. But imagine if John had lived through that. I know what would have happened. Double Fantasy wouldn't have got any higher than about number 15 in the charts. But maybe a next album, if he had taken control, and I don't think he would have done, but if he had taken control, he could have done his own album and it could have been interestingly good. But I think by this point, by 1975, Yoko had him by the bollocks, financially, in every way whatsoever. She had him, but she still needed to use that man, as she does today. She uses that man. She uses that man's name. The son, Sean, he uses his dad's name. And, and yet when people say, oh, why are you talking about my dad, John Lennon? Well, let's talk about me, or Yoko. Oh, let's not talk about John, or just talk about it for 2 minutes. Let's talk about my bullshit. Nobody's interested in your bullshit. Nobody's interested in Sean's bullshit. Nobody's interested in James Paul McCartney. Nobody's interested in Heather. Nobody gives a fuck. Or Zach Starkey. Nobody gives a fuck about anybody, and you shouldn't do. All we should give a fuck about is the Beatles and their music and what happened afterwards, after the Beatles, and how it went down, how it never even rose in Ringo's case. I mean, let's just not kid ourselves about it. That's what I'm saying. Don't kid yourselves. Let's take them for what they are. Paul McCartney is a cheap egomaniac bastard, right? Who saved so much money and made so many shit albums. He is a joke in Britain now. George Harrison was a non-starter. Okay, he might have started off with All Things Must Pass, but not many people bought that album. It was too expensive, and it's got a whole album of bullshit on there, which is not necessary. So he was ignored in Britain. He was ignored through the 70s. We can look at it now and say, "Oh yeah, wasn't George's career good?" It wasn't. It was. It wasn't even registered. It wasn't even registered in the 70s. Ringo was different because he was, like I said, he was the goofy Beatle, and as a result, there was a certain charm which which went across from children to older people to just people who liked Ringo and what he stood for. And like I said, there's one more in there, John. And I've just said all that I think about what happened with John. I think he turned into a pathetic loser at the end of his life. I think all the sound bites he could have said, everything John and Yoko represented was a joke. It was a farce. And it still looks that way. And do you know, my wife, she said to me, she said, what do you think John would be like if he was alive today? Bear in mind she's Jewish. She said, "I bet he'd be anti-Semitic, pro-Palestinian, and all this." And I said, "No, I don't think he would, because I'll tell you something. He's not stupid. Yoko's not stupid. Who's in charge of the music business? Who's in charge of being an entrepreneur in general? It's Jewish people. So of course he wouldn't have been anti-Semitic. He would have cut his own hand off to be like that. Oh, he might have had his own personal feelings about Jews, but he certainly wouldn't have written a song about how he hated the state of Israel. No way. No way. Not even if Yoko had said. Nope. So there were certain causes that he wouldn't have touched. He just he was like he wanted to be a populist, and that's the problem. That's what let him down. Instead of sticking with his agenda, he stuck with what Paul's doing. Oh, everyone hates Trump. Let's all hate Trump, and I shall speak about hating Trump, and it make me more popular. But it doesn't. It divides people because there's a lot of people out there that do like Trump, but also like your music. But the minute you say that you don't like Trump just to look more popular, then those people are going to go off you. In my case, even more. Yoko smells, yeah. And she's got a sideways cunt. So that's enough to hate her for. Is he? Yeah, I know some people actually like Yoko's music. Are they that fucking brainwashed? I ask you. Are they that fucking brainwashed? Anyway, having said this, this is just my thing about Yoko. So I will be going now, but I'm going to come back later on today because I want to do another video. I was supposed to be doing a film, and I'm not going to tell you what film it was, but it was I couldn't do it. It was so fucking difficult. It was difficult to get everything done, but it will be coming soon. Either that, I'm just going to start off with a new film, which is going to be a really short, crappy film, so I could just get through it quick. But I've been trying to get the narration and the jokes and the footage all together in one section. It is fucking almost impossible with the hardware that I've got. But anyway, just some vinyl nerd news at the moment. I'm very angry with father and son because all they care about now is the Yankee dollar. So you might believe in God, but God is gonna fucking rip a hole in your ass if you keep getting greedy, you cunts. No, bollocks to you two, you greedy fuckers, and I hate that. And also, I saw a film this morning. It was really shit. It was, and it's something to do with Adam Sandler, so you can guess it's got to be shit. And it was called The Wrong Missy. And I was looking at this woman, and she's a total nutter. Right? Watch the advert, and you'll get an idea. And I thought that is Beetle Babe, and that's another parasite. I'll get my vagina out for you as long as you give me 50 quid. It's terrible. We shouldn't have nothing to do with these people. And I'm called an evil bully. Hey?